You've been taught to fight life, to control everything, to always push harder, aim higher, chase more. But what if that's the reason you're tired all the time? What if all that forcing, fixing, and overthinking is what's keeping you stuck? They said success comes from control, from never stopping, from always doing. But if that were true, why do so many people who have it all still feel lost? Why do you still feel anxious, restless, like something's missing? The truth is, life was never meant to be forced. It was meant to flow. Tonight, we're not here to add more to your to-do list. We're here to let go of the pressure, the noise, the need to always have the answers. And in that letting go, you'll find something better. Stillness, clarity, freedom. For thousands of years, Buddhist wisdom has whispered a quiet truth. Peace isn't found in controlling life, it's found in allowing it. Not by chasing, but by trusting. Not by gripping, but by releasing. These teachings aren't just old words in a book, they're a doorway to a quieter mind, a lighter heart, a life that moves with you, not against you. As you listen tonight, something will shift. The tension will start to melt. The thoughts will slow down. And for the first time in a while, you'll feel safe to just be. This isn't just another audio to fall asleep to. This is the start of your return to flow. So take a breath. Let the weight drop. You've carried enough. And now, let's begin. You've felt it, that sudden rush of emotion, the tightening in your chest when someone says the wrong thing, the sting of disappointment, the wave of anger, the quiet ache of sadness. It shows up out of nowhere, and before you realize it, you're deep in it. A single thought turns into a storm, a passing feeling becomes a trap. But what if it didn't have to? What if you could feel it all, without holding on to any of it? Not by running, not by numbing, but by seeing clearly. That's what this is. That's where we begin, not with some huge moment, but in the smallest space, the breath before a reaction, the pause between thoughts, the flicker of awareness that says, this too will pass. This is Anica's truth, that everything changes, constantly. It's not a concept to memorize, it's a way to meet life. And once you see it in action, not just in theory, everything begins to soften. Not in some magical instant, but breath by breath, moment by moment. You've been told to control emotions, to fix them, to fight them. But what if that's why you suffer? What if the peace you've been chasing is already here, quietly waiting behind your grip? Anika doesn't ask you to escape your experience. It invites you to experience it more deeply with the full understanding that it won't stay. You might notice it first in small things, a sudden irritation when someone cuts you off, the heaviness that follows a mistake, the lingering anxiety after a hard conversation. Normally, you cling, you replay it, you react. But if you pause and notice what's really happening underneath the surface, something shifts. That anger that felt so solid, it's already different than it was a minute ago. That fear, it's already fading. Emotions aren't fixed. They're like weather systems moving through your inner sky. You don't have to stop the rain. You just need to stop building houses in storms. Most suffering doesn't come from the emotion itself, but from what the mind builds around it. You feel sadness, and then suddenly you're telling yourself a story. This always happens to me. I can't handle this. Something's wrong with me. The emotion becomes a judgment, and the judgment becomes a cycle. But if you catch it early and say gently, this is just what's passing through me right now, you don't have to go down with the story. You feel the wave, but you don't drown in it. You breathe and you allow it, and slowly you realize it's already changing. It always was. There's a quiet power in noticing how things shift, The breath you're taking now wasn't here a second ago. That tightness in your chest, feel it again. Is it the same as it was when you first noticed it? Really look. Most people don't. They label it, then react. But when you stay curious, when you just watch without interfering, you'll see how emotion rises, peaks, softens, and fades. You don't have to push it out. You don't have to pretend it isn't there. You just have to stop feeding it stories. This doesn't mean becoming passive. It means becoming wise. When you truly see that everything changes, you don't rush to fix what isn't permanent. You meet what's here with gentleness. You don't resist it, and you don't grasp at it. You simply let it be. And in that allowing, it starts to shift on its own. This is what liberation feels like, not dramatic, not loud, but quiet and steady like water wearing away stone. Even happiness becomes softer when you understand anicca. You stop clinging to good moments, afraid they'll slip away. You stop chasing highs, thinking they'll last forever. And because of that, you enjoy them more. You taste the sweetness of life without needing to own it. You let things move through you with open hands. The joy of impermanence is that everything becomes more precious not because it lasts, but because it doesn't. This practice begins now, wherever you are. You don't need to be in a monastery. You don't need years of meditation experience. You just need to notice. When you feel a wave of emotion, breathe. Let it be there. Don't rush to understand it. Don't turn it into a problem. Just be with it. Like sitting with a friend who needs no advice, only presence. That's what you offer your own heart. Presence, without judgment, without control. And if you forget, that's okay. Start again. This isn't about being perfect. It's about being present. One moment at a time. There will be times when the emotion feels overwhelming, when you want to escape it or act on it. But if you can just pause just for a few seconds, you'll find that something inside you is bigger than the feeling. Something steady, something still. That's your awareness. That's the part of you that doesn't come and go. That's the place you return to every time you remember to stop clinging. Over time, you'll begin to trust it. You'll see the patterns of your mind more clearly. You'll notice how a thought becomes a story, how a feeling becomes an identity, how quickly you go from "I feel sad" to "I am sad" to "I've always been this way." And you'll start to interrupt that loop. Gently, kindly, without force. You'll say, "This is just what's happening right now," and you'll let it pass through, like wind through open windows. Anicca teaches you that nothing stays. And that's not depressing, it's freeing. It means you don't have to hold on so tight. You don't have to control every outcome. You don't have to fear change. Because change is what makes healing possible. Change is what allows joy to return. Change is what lets you breathe through the hard parts, knowing they will move. There is so much power in seeing clearly, in staying present with what is, instead of trying to manage what might be. The more you rest in that awareness, the more peace you feel. Not because life is easier, but because you're not at war with it. You stop fighting the moment. You stop needing it to be different. And when you stop resisting, you free up all that energy. Energy you can use to heal, to grow, to love, to be. Not as someone with no emotions, but as someone no longer ruled by them. You'll start to feel more at ease in your own body. You'll notice your shoulders relaxing, your breath deepening, your mind softening. You won't have to try so hard to be okay. You'll just be. That's what awareness gives you, a home you can return to, no matter what's happening outside. You don't need to fix every thought. You just need to see it. And in that seeing, it loses its power over you. This is the medicine of presence. The more you practice, the more it becomes natural. You'll catch yourself in moments you never noticed before. The tight jaw, the racing thoughts, the sudden spike of defensiveness. And instead of reacting, you'll breathe. You'll feel, you'll let go. Maybe not right away, maybe not every time, but more and more, until letting go becomes a habit, until peace becomes your resting place. And you'll see that none of this is about avoiding life. It's about engaging with it more fully. When you stop clinging to how things should be, you start appreciating them as they are, even the hard parts, even the uncomfortable ones, because you know they won't last. You know they're here to teach you something, and when they've taught you, they'll leave. That's how the mind works. That's how healing works. That's how life flows when you let it. So let it. Let the breath come and go. Let the emotion rise and fall. Let the moment pass without trying to hold it. You don't have to be the master of your emotions. You just have to be their witness. You don't have to fix everything. You just have to feel it and let it move. The storm doesn't need your fear to pass. It needs your stillness. You are not your thoughts. You are not your emotions. You are the awareness behind them, the space they pass through. And that space is where freedom lives. Keep returning to it. Keep trusting it. Let it hold you, moment by moment, breath by breath. This is how life flows. Naturally. And now, so do you. You're beginning to see it now. That peace doesn't come from avoiding, fixing, or forcing. It comes from allowing, from loosening your grip on what passes through. But there's one thing most people never think to let go of. The one thing they cling to harder than anything else. The one thing that creates most of the tension, the comparison, the confusion. That thing is the idea of you. Not your real self, but the version your mind built. The image you carry around. The one made of stories, labels, roles, opinions, memories. It sounds like, this is who I am. I'm just not that kind of person. People like me don't do things like that. And without realizing it, those sentences become a cage. Not a visible one, but a tight, invisible script that keeps playing in your head and shaping how you respond to life. This idea of self seems helpful. It feels like stability, like grounding. But it's not. It's pressure. It's a demand to keep acting in line with your past. It tells you, stay consistent, be predictable, defend the story. But life doesn't work like that. Life is movement. And flow is impossible if you're constantly checking back to make sure you're still being the you think you're supposed to be. The ego doesn't just show up in arrogance or loudness. It appears in the quiet thoughts that say, I can't, I have to, they'll think less of me, that's not like me. It shows up in the need to protect your image, to avoid being misunderstood, to prove something. It's subtle, but heavy. It's what makes you feel small in rooms full of people. It's what makes you overthink before speaking. It's what makes you question yourself even when your heart is clear. When you start seeing this, everything begins to open. Because you're not being asked to get rid of your identity. You're just being asked to stop clinging to it, to stop confusing it for who you really are. You can still have a name, a voice, preferences, opinions, but without the weight of needing them to define you, without the need to defend them as truth. When that pressure lifts, life starts to breathe again. Every identity you wear was shaped by something: your childhood, culture, past experiences, relationships, fears, traumas, praise, rejection. And while those things shaped you, they are not you. They are conditions, not essence. When you begin to see that, you stop personalizing everything. You stop holding on so tightly to being right, being seen, being validated. Because you realize there's something more peaceful than being someone. It's simply being. Flow comes naturally when you stop checking your reflection, when you stop measuring yourself against past versions, when you let go of the inner narrator always whispering, "This is who I am." Because that narrator doesn't speak from truth, It speaks from fear, from habit, from comparison. And when you quiet it, what's left isn't emptiness, it's freedom. You've been taught to build a strong identity, to find your passion, your path, your true self. But maybe the truth isn't found in building, but in dissolving. Maybe clarity comes not when you define yourself, but when you become quiet enough to see who you are without labels, when you feel safe enough to not perform, when you no longer need to be anyone in particular. There's a calmness in not needing to be understood, in not needing to explain, in simply acting from presence without referencing your past. That's not forgetfulness. That's freedom. You respond instead of react. You move with what's needed, not with what fits the story you've carried. Think about how often you say, I am anxious, I am shy, I am smart, I am not good at that, I am this, I am not that. Each time, the mind shrinks your whole being into a fixed definition. And that definition becomes a boundary. You start to live inside that shape. You limit what you try, who you meet, how you show up. Not because the world is limiting you, but because your own mind is. That's the grip of identity. But the truth is, you are not a thing. You are not a noun. You are a verb. You're not the story. You're the awareness the story passes through. You're not your habits. You're not your patterns. You're not your preferences. Those things may arise, but they are not you. When you see that, even for a moment, it's like something unclenches inside. You stop needing to fix or prove or explain. You just are. Letting go of identity isn't erasing your personality. It's releasing the demand for consistency with a past that no longer fits. You're allowed to change. You're allowed to evolve. You're allowed to contradict yourself. Growth is contradiction. It's the undoing of who you thought you were. And if you hold too tightly to old versions of you, life will feel like a constant struggle. The idea that you have to figure yourself out can become a prison, as if your job is to find the perfect label and wear it forever. But what if you didn't need to be figured out? What if you could be a little messy, a little uncertain, a little different each day and still be whole? That's not confusion. That's presence. That's the truth showing up in real time, without pretense. You stop asking, who am I supposed to be right now? And instead ask, what's needed in this moment? The answer might surprise you. It might be silence. It might be boldness. It might be stillness. It might be laughter. And when you're not stuck in identity, you can meet the moment fully, not as a role, but as presence itself. This is how you start to flow. Effortless action arises because there's no longer resistance. You don't have to protect a story. You don't have to be seen a certain way. You're not guarding an image. You're just here, responsive, awake, at ease. The more you trust that, the more energy is freed. You don't waste it trying to be liked or proving you're right. That energy becomes clarity. It becomes compassion. It becomes movement aligned with truth. Even your spiritual identity can become a trap. You start trying to act spiritual, speak a certain way, avoid certain emotions, maintain a peaceful mask. But all of that is more identity, more control. The truth is, awakening isn't about being more of anything. It's about being less of what you're not, less defended, less reactive, less attached to how you appear. In this space, love becomes lighter. You don't need someone to validate your worth. You don't enter relationships as a role, or a fixer, or a savior. You just show up with presence, not persona. That kind of love flows because there's no pressure behind it. It doesn't need constant reinforcement. It doesn't collapse when misunderstood. It doesn't rely on identity to exist. Even creativity expands when you're free from identity. You stop making art to be seen as talented. You stop writing to be called wise. You stop performing to be applauded. You just express what wants to come through. And what comes through is more honest, more alive, more original, because it's not filtered through who you're supposed to be. There's a humility that grows here. Not the kind that puts you down, but the kind that no longer needs to lift you up. You stop needing to feel special to feel whole. You stop needing recognition to feel real, because you already feel rooted. You don't need an identity to be complete. You already are. This dissolving is gentle. You don't force it. You don't rip away your sense of self. You just notice the places where clinging creates tension. You notice how often you edit your words to protect an image. You notice when you feel defensive or not because something true was said, but because something threatened your story. That noticing is enough. Awareness starts the loosening. The more you watch the mind build identity, the more space you feel. A thought arises. I'm not enough. And you see it. Just a thought, not a truth. A memory surfaces. People like me never succeed. And you see it, just a pattern, not reality. A label echoes. I'm too sensitive, too loud, too quiet, too much, not enough. And you see it, a collection of words that you don't need to keep. You get to live without boxing yourself in. You get to show up without armor. You get to be more of yourself by needing less of an identity. And that's where the real strength lives, not in knowing who you are, but in not needing to, in trusting that whatever rises from awareness is already enough. This kind of trust doesn't come from thought. It comes from presence, from sitting with yourself quietly again and again until the noise fades, until the roles fall away, until all that's left is breath, stillness, and awareness, alive and empty and full. You won't find yourself in the mirror of the world. You'll find yourself in the silence underneath everything the world reflects. There's no identity in flow. There's only participation, only openness, only responding with full attention, without agenda. You're not trying to win. You're not trying to prove. You're not trying to fix your image. You're just here, and being here fully is the most honest thing you'll ever do. So, let the old ideas fall away. Let the need to be seen a certain way dissolve. Let the story unravel. You are not here to live as a fixed idea. You are here to move, to grow, to change, to flow. And flow doesn't ask you to be someone. It asks you to be. To live from the stillness that needs no name. To speak from the depth that needs no title. To love from the freedom that needs no role. This is how you return to yourself. Not the small, limited self made of labels, but the spacious self that was never born and never broken. The self that doesn't speak in words, but in presence. The self that doesn't need approval, because it was never separate to begin with. Here, there's nothing to prove, nothing to defend, nothing to hold, just life, flowing through you. And you, flowing back into life, quietly, effortlessly, free. When you stop clinging to who you think you are, something quieter starts to guide you. Not a voice from outside, not a role you have to perform, but an inner sense that knows how to move without force, how to act without trying to impress, how to live without constantly adjusting your mask. That stillness doesn't need identity to function, but there's something else it needs: balance. Not the kind of balance that's perfectly still, the kind that breathes, adjusts, responds. A living balance. A way of moving through each day that keeps you upright, not by holding you stiff, but by keeping you soft enough to respond to life in real time. That's the middle way. Not a rulebook, not a theory. A practice, a rhythm, a steady hand in the swirl of extremes. The middle way isn't about standing still. It's about not getting pulled so far in either direction that you lose your center. Life constantly throws options, reactions, urgencies at you, pulling your mind toward indulgence or denial, pushing your heart toward reactivity or suppression. It's easy to swing to the edges, too much, too little, too fast, too withdrawn. The middle way helps you feel the pull before it takes you. It gives you a way to check your position before you tip over. This path isn't about staying neutral, it's about staying awake, not being frozen between opposites, but fluidly navigating between them. You start seeing in each moment, am I overreaching or holding back? Am I forcing or avoiding? Am I acting from fear or from clarity? These questions don't always come with words. They arise as felt sense, as subtle discomfort or ease, as tension or breath. You learn to listen to that feedback before it becomes suffering. When you start using the middle way as a real-time practice, it changes the way you make decisions. You don't ask, what's the right thing to do, in the rigid sense. You ask, what's balanced right now? Because what's right isn't always fixed. It depends on awareness, timing, inner state. The same action can be compassionate one day and reactive the next. That's why this path isn't about copying wise behavior, it's about cultivating wise perception. Every situation becomes a chance to feel where you are. Someone says something hurtful. One part of you wants to strike back, another wants to shut down completely. But there's a third option, the one that pauses, breathes, and responds from steadiness. Not passive, not aggressive, just grounded. The more you notice this space, the more it opens up. The more you learn to live from it, the more peace you carry even in conflict. This isn't a moral tightrope. It's not about perfection. It's about dynamic balance. Like walking, you're never perfectly still. You're constantly adjusting. You're leaning slightly left, then right, then center again. Each movement is correction. And yet, from the outside, it looks like flow. Life is the same. Every conversation, every task, every choice is a chance to feel your weight, your footing, your breath, and correct gently. Balance is not found in rules, it's found in response. That's why clinging to structure too tightly can throw you off. Discipline without flexibility becomes rigidity. Freedom without structure becomes chaos. The middle way isn't between chaos and order, it's the dance with them. You feel when you're pushing too hard, when you're escaping, when you're overthinking, when you're drifting, and you bring yourself back. Not with punishment, with awareness. This awareness sharpens with practice. You begin to see how extremes show up in subtle forms. Not just loud reactions, but small habits, overcommitting to please others, avoiding rest out of guilt, numbing emotions instead of meeting them. Each one pulls you off center. The middle way doesn't shame you for that. It simply invites you to return. Returning is a moment-to-moment choice. It starts in the body. You notice tension in your jaw, that's a sign. You notice rushing thoughts, that's another. You pause. You feel your breath. You reconnect to what's here now. That's not a delay, it's wisdom in motion. Every time you return to that center, you're training your nervous system to trust presence over panic. This practice isn't distant or lofty, it's practical. You use it while responding to an email, while deciding what to say in a hard conversation, while choosing whether to speak or stay quiet. You sense, am I centered? Am I aligned? Or am I reacting from a wound? The answer doesn't always come in words. Sometimes it's a tight stomach. Sometimes it's a deep exhale. You learn to read your own signals. You start to notice that the pull toward extremes often comes from fear. Fear of being wrong, of being rejected, of losing control. The middle way doesn't ask you to fight fear. It asks you to stay rooted while fear moves, to feel the pull without letting it carry you. You don't need to win, you just need to stay. Stay present, stay curious, stay kind. Kindness is part of balance. It's what keeps discipline from becoming self-punishment. It's what makes you rest without guilt. It's what lets you say no without anger, and yes without self-erasure. Without kindness, balance becomes a performance. With kindness, balance becomes support. You start choosing actions not because they look good, but because they feel true. Feeling truth requires slowing down, not always physically, but mentally. You start questioning the speed at which you make decisions, form opinions, jump to conclusions. You begin to sense that real clarity isn't fast, it's steady. The middle way teaches you to give space before reacting, space for nuance, space for truth to surface. Not because you're unsure, but because you're deepening. This deepening touches everything. You don't just eat mindfully, you sense what kind of nourishment you actually need. You don't just listen to others, you feel where your listening is coming from. Is it genuine presence or a need to fix? Is it curiosity or control? The middle way turns routine moments into sacred opportunities for clarity. Not because you're forcing meaning, but because you're paying attention. Attention becomes your guide. You stop needing strict rules because your awareness becomes sensitive enough to guide you. You feel imbalance early. You adjust early. And when you miss it, you don't spiral, you simply come back. That's the heart of this path, always returning, never punishing, just adjusting. Over time, this path helps you hold paradox. You stop needing black and white answers. You get more comfortable with not knowing. You stop needing to define everything in advance. Because you realize truth reveals itself in presence, not in over-planning, not in overthinking, in being. This makes you more flexible, not less grounded. Because your grounding comes from clarity, not rigidity. You begin to move differently, speak differently, not with hesitation, but with care, with attentiveness. You start making fewer decisions from impulse and more from alignment. You start living less from should and more from sincerity. And this sincerity is what keeps you in balance, because you're always centered, but because you know how to return to it. There is nothing passive about this. It takes courage to live in the middle, to not react when provoked, to not numb when overwhelmed, to not prove yourself when judged. That strength doesn't come from force, it comes from presence, from holding your ground gently, from acting without needing to control the outcome. Even in rest, the middle way helps you stay awake. You stop swinging between burnout and collapse. You stop using productivity to outrun worthlessness. You rest before the crash. You nourish without guilt. You pause without apology. That's not laziness. That's intelligence. You begin to trust that presence is more powerful than performance. And when life gets intense, you don't need to disappear into distraction or numbness. You stay in contact with what's real. You breathe. You feel. You respond as best you can. And when you fall into old habits because you will, you don't shame yourself. You return. You recalibrate. You keep learning. That's balance. This isn't about becoming someone new. It's about remembering how to move without losing yourself, how to speak without posturing, how to listen without disappearing, how to feel fully without becoming the feeling. That's what balance means. Here, not 50-50, not perfection, but presence. Not staying in the middle out of fear, but out of wisdom. As this becomes your way of being, it gets quieter. You don't talk about balance, you live it. People feel it in your calm, in your steady decisions, in your timing. You respond when others rush. You stay soft when others harden. Not because you're better, but because you're present. And presence knows the difference between reactivity and response. This presence creates spaciousness in your mind, in your body, in your relationships. You start noticing how much tension you used to carry, how much energy you used to waste swinging between extremes. Now that energy returns to you. It becomes clarity, compassion, resilience. You stop burning out. You stop bouncing between control and collapse. You live steadier, breathe deeper. Even under pressure, you move with awareness. You can act quickly, but not impulsively. You can be strong, but not harsh. You can say no, but not from fear. You can say yes, but not from guilt. That's not balance you achieve once, it's balance you maintain, one breath at a time. There's nothing to prove, nothing to chase. The middle way isn't a destination, it's a home, a place you return to when the world pulls you apart, a rhythm you move with when everything else gets loud. You don't cling to silence, you don't cling to noise. You walk through both, with awareness. That's enough. And when you live this way, others feel it. Not because you preach it, but because your presence makes space for theirs. You don't try to fix them. You don't try to save them. You meet them where they are, while staying rooted in your own balance. That's the most generous thing you can offer. This path continues every day, in small moments, in deep breaths, in gentle corrections. You don't need to get it perfect. You just need to stay close to presence. Let awareness lead. Let kindness soften. Let wisdom guide. And no matter how far you sway, always return to center. This is the art of living well, not through control, but through calibration. Not by freezing, but by flowing. Not by being right, but by being real. This is the middle way, not as a theory, but as a lived experience. A path you walk with your whole being, quietly, steadily, with breath, with clarity, with peace. Even with balance, something deeper still pulls at you. You pause, you breathe, you respond with awareness, and yet, without knowing why, you sometimes fall into the same reactions, the same thoughts, the same emotions. Patterns you didn't choose, but feel caught in. The loop repeats, not because you aren't trying, but because something underneath the surface is driving the wheel. Something older than your latest insight, older than your conscious mind. These are Sankaras, deep mental formations that live beneath your daily awareness. They're not just habits, they're impressions, accumulations. Emotional grooves worn into the landscape of your mind by years of reacting the same way to similar triggers. They're the leftover energy of what you've clung to or pushed away, fear that stayed too long, anger that didn't release, pain that you numbed instead of felt. And they don't just disappear with understanding. They operate silently, waiting for the right moment to reappear. You can think of Sankaras as the residue of reaction. Every time you react without presence, a mark is left behind. Over time, those marks harden into tendencies. The tendency to withdraw, to lash out, to shut down, to crave attention, to avoid conflict. They feel automatic because, in a way, they are. The body remembers. The nervous system holds them. The mind continues the loop, not because it's bad, but because it believes it's keeping you safe. These formations disrupt your natural flow. They block awareness. They cloud your ability to see the present moment for what it is. Instead, you respond to the past projected onto now. You aren't speaking to what's in front of you, you're reacting to something stored deep inside. Someone criticizes you, and it's not just their words that hurt, it's every old wound they touched without knowing. This is why presence sometimes slips, even when you know better. The Sankara speaks before you do. Letting go of Sankaras isn't about effort. It's about awareness. You don't rip them out. You don't shame them away. You meet them. You feel them. And most of all, you allow them to rise without reacting to them again. That's the detox. Not avoidance, not suppression, but full conscious presence with what's surfacing. When these formations come up, they don't always feel logical. You might feel fear with no danger, shame with no crime, sadness without reason. The mind rushes to explain, but explanation isn't release. What these formations need is space, non-resistance. You give them room to move without giving them more energy. That's how they weaken. That's how they dissolve. Awareness is the fire that burns these residues, clear not violently, but gently. When you remain still as the discomfort rises, you break the cycle of reaction. You stop feeding the old loop. You don't reach for distraction. You don't follow the story. You stay with the raw sensation. You breathe. You soften. You let it express without acting on it. And over time, the pattern fades. This requires trust that you can feel intensity without collapsing, that you can meet your oldest pain without it owning you, because sankharas are persistent. When you stop reacting, they sometimes scream louder, not to punish you, but because they're unraveling, they're surfacing to be seen fully, maybe for the first time. Stay through the discomfort, through the shaking, through the flood. Not because you enjoy it, but because you're not afraid to feel anymore. You're not healing through control. You're healing through presence, through witnessing the truth of what lives in you. Every time you do this, the nervous system releases something it was holding. The breath deepens, the body loosens, the pattern loses strength. That's the process, not dramatic breakthroughs, but consistent honesty, quiet courage, repetition of presence. Sometimes sankharas appear in thoughts that seem urgent. The mind will say, "You have to fix this now. You have to do something." But urgency isn't clarity, it's residue. The need to fix is often the fear being disguised. The wisest choice is often to wait, to feel, to listen, to move only when the inner noise has settled. Because if you move from compulsion, the pattern rewrites itself. But if you stay still, it unwinds. Detox doesn't mean feeling nothing. It means stopping the habit of turning feeling into reaction. You don't make the emotion go away. You allow it to pass without becoming it. That gap between sensation and response, that's the ground where sankharas lose their roots. That's where you free yourself without force. This isn't a quick process. Some sankharas are from early in life, some from years of repetition, some passed down from family, culture, collective fear. They come with layers. And each time they arise, they give you a chance to fight, but to free. You don't have to know their exact story. You don't need a detailed map of your past. You just need willingness to feel without escaping. As you detox, subtle shifts begin. Reactions become slower. Words carry less defensiveness. You start noticing when you're about to act out of habit and pause. The pause is powerful. It's where new patterns are born, where new space opens. You realize you don't have to follow every thought. You don't have to obey every urge. You can be aware without being controlled. That's when flow returns, not as a reward, but as a result of not blocking yourself anymore. The effort you use to spend reacting, suppressing, overthinking it, becomes energy for movement, clarity, creativity. You don't need to constantly heal, you start to live from healing. Not because the pain is gone, but because it no longer leads. And yet, there's no arrival point. Sankharas rise in layers. Some patterns stay quiet until you're ready to meet them. Life brings triggers not as punishments, but as invitations. Each challenge, each discomfort, each stuck moment is a chance to uncover another hidden reaction. You stop fearing these moments. You meet them with curiosity. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening again?" you begin asking, "What is this showing me?" That simple change softens the whole experience. You become a student of your own inner world, not a fixer, not a judge, just a witness, a participant in your own liberation. As old tendencies loosen, your presence gets lighter. Interactions become less loaded. You don't brace yourself before speaking. You don't rehearse how to be. You don't carry tension into every conversation. That's not because life got easier, but because you're not projecting as much onto it. You start recognizing when your words are coming from clarity or from residue. The tone shifts, the timing changes. You stop interrupting yourself with the need to perform. And in that silence, your truest responses emerge or rehearsed, not filtered, just real. This realness makes connection easier. You no longer meet people through layers of defense. You listen with your whole body. You speak without overcompensating. Even your eyes soften. And people can feel that. They sense you're not trying to prove something. You're just present. And that presence creates safety not only for them, but for you. Sankara work brings you home to your body. Because many of these formations aren't mental, they're physiological. The chest that always tightens, the shoulders that lift, the gut that braces. Awareness teaches you to live inside those sensations without shutting down. You don't need to escape. You learn to stay. And the more you stay, the more space returns, not just inside you but around you. You no longer fill the silence with unnecessary noise. You're okay not having the last word. You're okay not having the answer right away. That quiet is what replaces the old rush. You stop needing intensity to feel alive. Aliveness comes from stillness now. Sometimes sankaras release in unexpected ways. Tears without a story, shaking without fear, dreams that stir something loose. Trust the body's wisdom. It knows what it's doing. You don't need to analyze everything. You just need to support the release. That means staying hydrated, resting, moving slowly, saying no when your energy is low. Your system is doing deep work, honor that. This process rewires you, not just emotionally, but energetically. What once drained you doesn't affect you the same. What once triggered you now passes through. You feel more stable in joy, more grounded in sadness. You don't swing as far. You don't collapse as fast. That's not numbness, that's strength. You start sensing other people's sankaras too. Not to judge but to respond with compassion. You recognize when someone is speaking from a wound. You don't need to match their reactivity. You hold your space. You don't take it personally, because you know what it's like to be caught in a reaction that doesn't match the moment. This doesn't mean tolerating harm. It means recognizing what's yours to carry and what's not. You become more clear about boundaries, not as defense, but as clarity. You stop overextending. You stop absorbing what doesn't belong to you. You move from sovereignty, not from guilt. Eventually, this awareness becomes background. You don't need to practice it all the time. It becomes how you live, not always with effort, but with ease. Presence becomes your default. Old reactions may still visit, but they don't stay long. They don't lead. They don't define you. You walk differently, sit differently, speak differently, not because you're performing peace, but because you're no longer fueled by unrest. You're not living to escape your patterns. You're living from beyond them. That's not perfection. That's maturity. Not because you've mastered everything, but because you've stopped hiding from anything. This is what Sankara Detox gives you. Space. Inside your breath, inside your choices, inside your emotions. You don't always know what's coming next. But you no longer meet it with the weight of your past. You meet it with presence. And in that presence, you're finally free to respond not as a product of your conditioning, but as the clear awareness you've always been, quietly, without force, and fully alive. As the weight of unconscious patterns begins to fall away, something lighter takes its place, not passivity, not escape, but a quiet sense of clarity. No longer reacting from old pain, no longer pulled by automatic habits. You find yourself with space to move, to speak, to act. But now, a new question arises. How do you move through life with presence without falling back into striving? How do you engage fully without being driven by the need to prove, fix, or rush. This is where the heart of appamada begins to unfold, not in effort as force, but in effort as presence. A kind of alertness that isn't aggressive, a dedication that isn't exhausting, a way of showing up that honors both the moment and your natural rhythm. This is the path of effort without struggle, diligence without tension. Most people are taught to push, to always try harder, to chase goals with urgency. If something isn't working, the answer must be to apply more force. And if you slow down, you risk being left behind. But this conditioning creates inner pressure, the kind that tightens your breath, clouds your mind, and makes even simple tasks feel heavy. The moment you begin to think you have to fight for peace, you've already stepped out of it. Appamada doesn't mean doing less. It means doing from a different place. It means shifting from effort rooted in fear to effort rooted in clarity. You're not acting because you're panicked. You're not moving because you're behind. You're engaging because there's an inner sense of rightness, no pressure, no panic, just a steady commitment to presence. This kind of diligence is soft and alert. It doesn't resist the moment, but enters it with attention. When you move from appamada, you aren't rushing to the next thing. You're fully with what's here. If you're washing dishes, you're washing them with care. If you're having a conversation, you're listening without waiting for your turn to speak. The doing happens, but it flows from presence and from a tight need to finish, succeed, or achieve. Non-striving doesn't mean being lazy or detached. It means your actions are free from grasping. You do what needs to be done, but without the added layer of mental pressure. You're not trying to control the result. You're not turning the present moment into a tool to get somewhere else. Instead, you trust that right effort, grounded in awareness, brings about right outcomes without needing to force them. This approach transforms how you relate to your goals. You can have direction without obsession. You can move with intention without hardening into control. Your energy becomes more sustainable because it's not constantly drained by anxiety. You're not working from fear of failure. You're working from connection to what matters now. That connection nourishes you, even when the work is hard. You begin to notice when effort turns into strain. There's a subtle shift. You go from flow to friction, from openness to contraction. The breath shortens, the shoulders tense, the mind rushes. This is your signal, not to stop, but to recalibrate. You don't need to abandon the task. You just need to return to presence. Drop the mental weight. Feel your body. Let the action come from alignment, not urgency. Appamada is diligence with wisdom. It's effort that understands timing. Some things require stillness. Some require boldness. Some need patience. Some ask for surrender. Mindful effort feels the difference. It doesn't treat every problem the same. It doesn't apply the same pressure everywhere. It listens, it adjusts, it acts, but never out of fear. This way of moving also helps you avoid burnout, because what wears you down isn't just doing, it's the mental resistance that piles on top. It's the self-judgment, the internal deadlines, the belief that rest means failure. With appamada, rest becomes part of the rhythm. Pausing isn't falling behind, it's part of moving wisely. You're not abandoning your path. You're honoring your limits. This isn't indulgence, it's intelligence. When you allow yourself to pause, to step back, to feel before acting, your work deepens, your relationships soften, your mind clears. You become more responsive, less reactive. The energy you used to spend forcing life now supports you in living it fully. You begin to act from spaciousness. You're not driven by what others expect. You're not reacting to what you fear. You're simply doing what the moment calls for, from a place of internal steadiness. That steadiness isn't passive, it's alive. It's alert to what's needed and willing to act without being dragged by emotion or pressure. This also transforms your sense of discipline. Most people think discipline means forcing yourself to do things you don't want to do, but true discipline is something different. It's choosing what aligns with your deepest values, even when it's uncomfortable. It's staying connected to your intention, not just your impulse. And when that discipline is guided by presence, not punishment, it becomes a joy. You're not fighting yourself. You're walking with yourself. There's a deep respect in this way of living, respect for your energy, respect for your body, respect for time. You stop seeing yourself as a machine that has to produce. You start seeing yourself as an instrument of awareness. Your value isn't measured by how much you do, it's measured by how present you are in what you do. This helps you let go of comparison. You stop measuring your path against someone else's speed. You stop believing that faster is better, that louder means more important. You start tuning in to your own rhythm. You move when it's time. You rest when it's time. You listen to what's real, not what's expected. This inner alignment brings peace, not because everything is easy, but because you're not at war with your own pace. Even in ambition, this clarity remains. You can have big dreams without being consumed by them. You can take bold action without turning your life into a race. You're not proving your worth. You're expressing your truth. That expression doesn't need to be forced. It arises naturally when you stop trying to push life faster than it's ready to move. This kind of effort feels light in the body. You might be busy, but you're not frantic. You might be challenged, but you're not rigid. The movement is there, but it's graceful. You're in contact with what's essential. You don't waste energy on overthinking, on pleasing, on rushing through tasks just to finish. Every step becomes intentional. Every breath a reminder that this moment matters, not just the result. Appamada allows you to stay steady even when life gets difficult. You're not crushed by setbacks because your effort isn't tied to outcomes. You're committed to presence, not perfection. When things go wrong, you adjust, you learn. You keep showing up not because you're forcing yourself, but because something deeper is moving you. That deeper movement is what matters most. It's not flashy, it doesn't scream, but it's consistent. It carries you when motivation fades. It grounds you when things fall apart. You're not running on adrenaline. You're rooted in awareness. You don't need to hype yourself up to take action. You simply act when it's time, and rest when the moment is complete. This also changes how you relate to success. You stop chasing moments of validation. You stop needing constant proof that you're doing well. Your success becomes how well you stayed present, how honestly you showed up, how clearly you acted from intention. That kind of success can't be measured in numbers, but you feel it in your body, in your breath, in your peace. And when failure comes, as it always does, you meet it differently. You don't collapse, you don't panic, you reflect, you respond, because you're not ashamed of effort. You're not ashamed of trying. You're not driven by fear of falling. You're guided by a deeper rhythm, and that rhythm allows room for everything: success, failure, silence, motion. Nothing is wasted. This is what it means to walk through life awake, to give your energy fully, without holding back, but also without clinging, to love what you do without becoming trapped by it, to stay alert to what matters and relaxed about what doesn't. That's the art of mindful non-striving. It's not about doing nothing, it's about doing without tension. As this way of living deepens, you stop postponing peace. You don't say, "I'll relax when I'm done." You relax while doing. You don't wait for everything to be perfect before you feel okay. You feel okay now, and let that calm move through your actions. Your effort becomes love in motion. Your presence becomes your power. And others feel that too. You become someone people can trust. Not because you're flawless, but because your energy is stable. You don't bring panic into the room, you bring groundedness. You're not trying to control others, you're responsible for your own state. That kind of presence is rare and powerful. This doesn't mean you're always calm, but even when you're upset, you're conscious of how you act. Even when things feel hard, you know where to return. You don't abandon yourself. You stay. You move through it, not around it. And you do so with as much grace as the moment allows. That's what real effort looks like. It's not measured in struggle, it's measured in sincerity, in presence, in consistency. In your willingness to show up, again and again, with an open heart and a steady hand. Not for praise, not for approval, but because it's the most honest way to live. And when you live this way, you stop chasing flow. Flow becomes your default. Not because everything is smooth, but because you are. You're no longer pulled by extremes. You're no longer reacting from fear. You're acting from clarity. And that clarity is what makes your effort effortless. Appamada is not a destination. It's a moment-to-moment practice, a way of remembering what matters most, a commitment to live awake, to love without force, to act without clinging. You don't need to rush, you don't need to fix, you just need to stay with what's real. And from that place, life moves, quietly, clearly, without struggle, without strain, only presence, only flow, only effortless effort. The more you live from presence, the less you need to hold. When effort becomes aligned instead of forced, life stops feeling like something you have to push through. There's less grasping, less defending, less performing. What begins to surface in this stillness is something even subtler, a kind of lightness that doesn't come from getting what you want, but from seeing that you don't have to hold so much in the first place. Not your roles, not your thoughts, not even the idea that things should have fixed meaning. This is where the depth of sunyata reveals itself, not as a concept to believe, but as a space to live from. Emptiness, in this sense, doesn't mean void or lack. It means freedom from fixed form. It means the openness beneath appearances. It means not being confined by what something seems to be. When you see clearly, you begin to notice that everything you hold onto, every belief, identity, emotion, relationship, is shifting, always changing. And yet, you keep trying to freeze it, define it, name it, turn it into something permanent. This grasping creates weight, tension, friction. Not because anything is wrong with life, but because you're trying to control what can never be held still. Sunyata is the realization that everything you cling to is empty of fixed essence. Your job isn't who you are. Your thoughts aren't the truth. Your emotions aren't permanent. Even your relationships are not fixed objects. They are living, breathing fields of interaction, constantly moving, reshaping. When you stop forcing life into solid shapes, something opens. You begin to relate to the world differently. Instead of treating people like characters in a script, you meet them with fresh eyes, without assumptions, without the past pressed over the present. You stop needing your relationships to fulfill a story. You stop needing labels to feel safe. You start allowing space between words, between reactions, between expectations. In work, this openness becomes creativity. The less you fixate on how things should be, the more you start noticing what's actually possible. You stop trying to make your role fit a rigid identity. You allow the task to unfold through presence, not pressure. This doesn't make you less focused, it frees your attention. You no longer resist change. You no longer need every plan to stay intact. You work with what's real, not what's frozen in your mind. Thoughts lose their grip when you see their emptiness. Not because you fight them, but because you stop mistaking them for absolute truth. You notice how quickly they arise, how they shift, how one thought contradicts the next. This doesn't make them meaningless, it makes them light. You can think clearly without being trapped in thought. You can observe the mind without being owned by it. The freedom of sunyata is not detachment in the cold sense. It's intimacy without stickiness. It's depth without density. It's being fully engaged while knowing that nothing needs to be possessed, that you don't need to carry everything you touch, that even the most beautiful experiences don't need to be held onto. This opens the heart in unexpected ways. Love becomes less about keeping and more about being with. You don't demand someone stay the same. You don't panic when dynamics shift. You begin to see that connection doesn't depend on control, that love can flow more freely when it isn't tied to ownership or permanence. You trust the natural rhythm of closeness and space. Letting life be empty doesn't mean letting it be meaningless. It means seeing that meaning is something that arises fresh from each moment, not something imposed from the past. The more space you give to your experience, the more clearly you feel what really matters. You begin to see the difference between what's real and what's just residue. This way of being softens conflict. You stop needing to win arguments because you no longer take every idea as an extension of your identity. You don't have to defend every belief. You can listen with openness, speak with honesty, and allow the space for disagreement without tension. That doesn't make you passive, it makes you grounded. In daily life, this shows up in small ways. You feel less disturbed when plans change. You're not thrown off by delay or disruption. You move with the shifting weather of events because you're no longer clinging to a solid picture of how things must go. That adaptability isn't indifference, it's wisdom. It's knowing that flow is only possible when your grip softens. Emptiness reveals itself most clearly in silence, not just outer silence, but inner silence, the space between thoughts, the pause between emotions, the stillness beneath your activity. This silence isn't absence, it's potential. The potential for clarity, for fresh insight, for a deeper kind of presence that doesn't come from thinking more, but from thinking less. You begin to see how much of your suffering came from mistaking what's temporary for something permanent. You held on to roles, outcomes, ideas. You resisted change. You tried to find solid ground in a world made of movement. Sunyata isn't about making peace with change, it's about seeing that change is the only thing that was ever real. When you relax into that, fear softens. In relationships, this brings ease. You don't need constant reassurance. You don't need to monitor every shift. You allow others their space to change, to grow, to move. You stop seeing people as fixed and start relating to their presence instead of your idea of them. That presence is what makes connection real, not roles, not expectations, but moment-to-moment openness. The more you live from this space, the more friction falls away. You don't resist what arises. You don't cling to what passes. You don't demand certainty from things that were never designed to be certain. And in that openness, something subtle emerges, a joy that doesn't depend on getting what you want, a peace that doesn't depend on everything going your way. This peace isn't passive, it's alive, it breathes with you. It shows up in how you move, how you listen, how you let go without shutting down. You start seeing that emptiness is what allows everything to happen. It's not a void, it's the canvas, the space in which all experience appears and disappears moment by moment. Even your sense of self becomes lighter. You stop defining yourself by history, labels, performance. You stop carrying the need to be consistent with who you were. You allow yourself to evolve without apology. You become a space through which life moves, not a fixed character trying to hold a shape. That's not losing your identity, it's letting it breathe. This space is not something you create. It's what remains when you stop filling every moment with thought, every silence with noise, every action with judgment. When you stop clinging, space appears. And in that space, truth can speak. You begin to know yourself not through analysis, but through direct experience. Not as an idea, but as a presence that doesn't need explanation. In this emptiness, compassion grows. Because the more you see that everything is moving, the more you stop judging people for being in process. You know that reactions aren't permanent. That pain isn't identity. That mistakes are part of movement. You become more patient, not by trying harder, but by seeing deeper. You also become less reactive. There's room inside you now, room between stimulus and response, room to breathe before speaking, room to feel before deciding. That space doesn't mean detachment. It means you're no longer trapped in automatic patterns. You respond with clarity, not compulsion. Sunyata turns urgency into presence. You stop rushing to resolve every emotion. You stop needing to fix discomfort immediately. You allow what arises to rise fully. You give it space. And in that space, it often resolves its not because you solved it, but because you let it unfold. This affects how you create, how you build, how you lead. You don't impose structure too soon. You give ideas time to ripen. You trust the unfolding process. You don't fear the unknown, you meet it with curiosity. You allow room for not knowing, which is where true creativity begins. Even your spiritual path becomes lighter. You stop chasing enlightenment as a destination. You stop needing to feel a certain way to believe you're growing. You realize the path is not about adding more eights, about removing what blocks, what's already here, what's already awake, what's already whole. Sunyata invites you to live from spaciousness, to trust what opens when you stop forcing, to listen more than you speak, to feel more than you explain, to allow more than you control. That trust changes your pace. Your rhythm slows, not from laziness, but from awareness. You stop trying to outrun yourself. You start walking with life. That walk becomes simpler, not in what you do, but in how you hold it. You stop measuring your worth by output. You stop organizing your value by comparison. You just keep returning to presence. That presence becomes the ground from which all action arises, not scattered, not desperate, but clear and steady. This is how emptiness fills you, not with answers, but with clarity. Not with beliefs, but with openness. Not with more ideas, but with less noise. You don't become disconnected. You become more real, more available, more free. You don't need to explain this to anyone. You just live it, quietly, fully, moment by moment. Meeting life as it comes without grasping, letting it move through you without resistance. Letting each breath carry what it must, and releasing what it no longer needs to hold. This is what it means to live spaciously, to let things come, to let things go, to stay soft in a world that wants you hard, to remain open, even when closing would be easier. That's not weakness. That's strength without armor. Sunyata doesn't offer control. It offers freedom, not from life, but from the illusion that you have to hold it all together. You don't. You never did. You're already held by something deeper than thought, something wider than form, something spacious enough to let everything be exactly as it is and still feel whole. Keep letting go, keep softening, keep trusting the space between things. That's where truth lives. That's where peace breathes. That's where you begin again, with nothing to carry and everything to feel. Spacious, light, free. When you stop clinging to form, something softens. You stop needing life to fit a shape it was never meant to hold. You stop gripping every thought, every role, every moment. That space you, open spaciousness of mind, of breath, of awareness, doesn't erase pain. It simply reveals that pain doesn't have to trap you. Even within openness, Discomfort still comes, loss still comes, grief still moves through the body. But now, you meet it differently. You stop sinking into it. You learn how to stay on top of it. You learn how to ride the wave. This is the shift, the part that changes everything, the moment when you stop treating suffering as something wrong and start meeting it as something workable. Dukkha, the core Buddhist term for suffering or unsatisfactoriness, is not a mistake. It's part of the fabric. It shows up not because life is broken, but because things change, people change, expectations break, and the mind resists what is. There's no bypass here. This isn't about avoiding or sugarcoating pain. It's about developing a new relationship to it, one where pain is not your enemy, where hardship is not your identity, where discomfort is no longer a reason to collapse, but an invitation to wake up. The suffering you feel does not need to drown you. It can show you how to stay afloat. It begins with presence, not presence as a technique, but as an orientation, being willing to feel without judgment, to allow what hurts without needing to label it as failure. The body contracts around discomfort. The mind reacts to avoid it. But what happens when you stop pulling away? When you stop fighting the current and start learning its movement? Pain is energy. It rises, it peaks, it moves. It speaks in sensations, in pressure, in heat, in tension. It wants to be felt, not analyzed. When you meet it fully, not with your head, but with your attention, it begins to move differently. The resistance starts to melt. And in that melting, you find space where there was once only tightness. This space is not comfort. It's capacity. The ability to stay, to not run, to not numb. Not because you're trying to prove strength, but because you know your avoidance creates more suffering than the pain ever could. What you suppress doesn't disappear, it stores. And what you turn toward eventually softens. You don't need to fix every emotion. You don't need to resolve every thought. You need to become the witness that stays steady while the storm moves through. Even grief has movement. Even heartbreak has rhythm. When you learn to feel without clinging, every wave of pain becomes something you can ride instead of sink into. This doesn't make you detached. It makes you stable. Your sensitivity doesn't decrease, your capacity increases. You begin to understand that pain can open you instead of break you. That hardship can deepen your presence instead of stealing it. Suffering can be fuel for insight, for compassion, for wisdom, but only if you stop treating it like poison. To float on dukkha is not to celebrate it, but to stop fearing it. To stop turning every discomfort into a catastrophe. To notice that most of what makes suffering unbearable is the way you tense around it, the stories you add to it, the resistance you pile on top of it. Pain alone is manageable. It's the mental reaction that turns it into torment. You start by naming what's true. There is pain, there is loss, there is confusion, but then you pause before the narrative begins. You don't need to build a house around the pain. You don't need to turn it into identity. You don't need to decide who you are based on what hurts. You just feel, directly, honestly, without story. The breath becomes your anchor. Every inhale, a return to what's real. Every exhale, a letting go of what's extra. You don't breathe to escape the pain. You breathe to make space for it, to hold it with dignity, to say, even this has room here, even this belongs. When you stop labeling discomfort as failure, you begin to learn from it. Every hard moment becomes a teacher. Every emotional contraction shows you where you're still attached, where you still want control, where you still expect something solid in a world that moves. This kind of clarity doesn't always feel good, but it frees you. And freedom, in time, brings a peace that comfort never could. You also learn to spot the habits that rise from pain. The avoidance strategies, the defensiveness, the habits of overworking, overthinking, isolating. You see how pain often isn't the issue, your reaction to it is. And when you start catching these habits as they arise, you stop strengthening them. You interrupt the pattern. You make space for a new choice. This doesn't mean you'll never fall. You will. You'll still feel overwhelmed sometimes. You'll still want to check out. But you'll return faster. You'll remember sooner. You'll recover with less damage. That's the result of practicing no perfection, but resilience. Your resilience isn't built by avoiding suffering. It's built by turning toward it again and again without collapse. Like learning how to stand in deeper and deeper water. At first it knocks you down. But over time, your legs learn the rhythm. Your body finds its balance. You stop fearing the wave. Even joy changes in this space. It becomes quieter, more grounded. Not a high you need to chase, but a lightness that arises when you're no longer crushed by every difficulty. You feel the joy of simply being able to stay present, to not run, to not be pulled under by life's inevitable storms. Pain becomes less personal. You stop thinking, "Why me?" and you start seeing, this is part of being alive. Everyone suffers. Everyone loses. Everyone feels grief, fear, doubt. This realization doesn't make you cold, it makes you connected. You stop isolating in your pain. You feel less alone, because you know you're walking a human path. From that place, compassion grows, not as an idea, but as a lived experience. You see others in pain, and you don't flinch. You don't need to fix them. You simply know what it feels like, and you stay with them. That staying becomes the most powerful thing you can offer. Your presence becomes medicine. You also become more honest with yourself, with others. You stop pretending to be okay when you're not. You stop hiding your struggles out of shame. Vulnerability stops feeling like weakness. It feels like alignment. You'd rather be real than perfect. You'd rather be true than polished. This honesty creates intimacy. It softens your walls. It invites others to show up fully, without fear of judgment. When you're no longer terrified of your own pain, you stop fearing theirs. And that mutual recognition builds something strong: trust, connection, healing. It all begins with being willing to face what hurts. As you keep meeting dukkha with clarity, your baseline changes. You stop expecting life to be painless. You stop waiting for all discomfort to go away before you start living. You begin to live in the middle of it, fully. Not because it's easy, but because it's real, because presence doesn't require comfort, it only requires willingness. You stop delaying peace. You stop saying, "I'll feel free when this ends." You start saying, "I'll feel free by staying open now, not later, not after everything is fixed, but here, with this breath, with this ache, with this moment, exactly as it is." And from that place, something surprising happens. Gratitude arises, not for the pain itself, but for your ability to hold it. Gratitude for the strength you didn't know you had. Gratitude for the depth of presence suffering invited you into. You begin to see that everything you ran from had something to teach you. That learning changes how you move forward. You stop needing guarantees. You stop needing life to go a certain way. You walk with presence, not with fear. You walk with courage, not because you feel brave, but because you know you don't need to be fearless to keep going. You know you just need to stay open. This openness is where freedom lives. Not beyond pain, but within it. Not as escape, but as awareness. When you no longer turn pain into a problem, you stop drowning in it. You float. You feel the movement. You rise and fall, but you don't sink. You ride the wave, steady and awake. This is not an escape from suffering. This is a new relationship with it. One that honors it, one that allows it, one that transforms it. because in that transformation, you meet something deeper than relief. You meet resilience. You meet presence. You meet the truth that you are more than what hurts. You are the awareness holding it all. So, when pain comes, you don't run. You breathe. You feel. You stay. You let it move. And in its passing, you find not only relief but wisdom, depth, strength, and the quiet knowing that nothing you face will ever be more powerful than your ability to remain present. You float, you ride, and you rise. As your relationship to pain begins to soften, you no longer feel the need to react to it in predictable ways. You learn to hold discomfort without collapsing. You let the wave pass through you without gripping it or letting it define your next move. This shift in your inner world naturally begins to ripple outward, especially in the way you speak. Words are not separate from your thoughts or emotions. They are how your inner world touches others. And now that your inner world is less reactive, less tight, it's time to explore how to speak without clinging, how to use your voice without building karma with every sentence. Most people don't realize how much weight they carry in their words. A comment isn't just a comment, it's a release of emotion, an attempt to prove something, a defense of an identity, a plea for approval, or an effort to dominate. So much speech isn't really about communication. It's about control. It's about clinging. Words become a way to hold on to certainty, to push away discomfort, to shape how others see you, to get a sense of self that feels solid, even if it's temporary. But when your speech is driven by attachment, it always creates some kind of entanglement. It either hooks others into your own unresolved emotions, or it hooks you into theirs. Either way, it pulls you out of presence and into story. And story is where conflict grows, because stories defend themselves. They have a point to make. They need to be believed. And when you speak from story instead of clarity, it becomes almost impossible to listen, to learn, or to connect. Non-clinging speech is not about saying less. It's about saying what is needed without holding on. It means releasing the need to be right, letting go of the need to be praised. Speaking with honesty, but not with grasping. Communicating clearly, but not controlling how others receive it. You still speak, you still express, but you don't carry tension in your words. You let them go the moment they leave your lips. This doesn't mean being passive or silent. It means learning to listen to your intention before you speak. Why are you about to say this? Is it to defend yourself? To gain sympathy? To push someone to act a certain way? Or is it to bring clarity, offer truth, share presence? The motivation behind your words matters. It's what determines whether your speech leaves peace or residue behind. One of the reasons clinging speech is so common is because it gives a quick feeling of relief. You lash out and feel powerful for a moment. You over-explain and feel temporarily safe. You interrupt and feel heard for a second, but that relief is shallow, and it usually creates more suffering, later misunderstanding, regret, defensiveness. The cycle continues. Presence gets buried beneath the noise. With mindful speech, you pause before that first impulse. You feel the urge to correct someone harshly, and you breathe. You feel the desire to share something just to be seen, and you question it. You sense the habit of explaining too much, and you ask yourself whether silence would carry more strength. Not every thought needs to become a sentence. Not every emotion needs to be shared instantly. Stillness can be more honest than words if the words are not clean. When you do speak, clarity becomes the guide. You say only what is necessary, not to be vague or evasive, but to avoid inflating your message with extra emotion. You speak in a way that's kind without being soft, truthful without being cruel, firm without being hard. You don't decorate your sentences to manipulate. You don't raise your volume to dominate. You speak as if your words are tools for connection, not weapons of control. One of the most powerful shifts in this practice is learning how to release the outcome of your communication. You can speak from your heart and still be misunderstood. You can offer truth and it may still be rejected. You can express yourself with full integrity and not receive the response you hoped for. Non-clinging speech means allowing this to be okay. You do not force understanding. You don't bend yourself to be accepted. You release your part with clarity and let go of what isn't yours to carry. This opens a new kind of space in conversation. You're no longer trying to steer the moment, you're present with it. You listen without plotting your next point. You speak without tightening around your message. The interaction becomes alive, something shared instead of controlled. That doesn't mean it's always easy, but it becomes honest. And honesty, held in presence, heals more than any clever argument ever could. In moments of conflict, this becomes even more important. You're triggered. Your body wants to react. Your thoughts sharpen. You feel the rising impulse to say something that will land, something that will protect you or prove your point. But in that space of awareness, you see it. You see how much energy is behind the words forming in your mouth, and you choose not to speak until that energy settles. You stay, you breathe, you watch the emotion rise and fall. And when the time comes to respond, the words are clear, measured, not manipulative, not defensive, just what's needed and no more. Over time, this changes how you view communication entirely. It stops being about winning, or even about being understood. It becomes about staying connected to truth, even when it's hard. About offering presence instead of performance. About responding instead of reacting. This doesn't always make conversations smoother, but it makes them cleaner. You don't carry regret afterward. You don't replay what you should or shouldn't have said. You were there, fully, and you spoke from that presence. This kind of speech also dissolves hidden tensions in your relationships. People may not know why they feel safer around you, but they do, because your words don't carry hidden hooks. You're not subtly manipulating, guilt-tripping, or demanding. Your voice becomes something others can trust, not because it's perfect, but because it's sincere. Even your inner speech begins to shift. You stop narrating every emotion. You stop creating drama out of discomfort. You notice the stories forming in your mind and you don't believe all of them. You start speaking to yourself with the same clarity you offer others. You stop clinging to internal commentary that fuels self-doubt or judgment. You create space in your own mind by letting go of unnecessary commentary. This inner spaciousness supports your outer communication. The less reactive your inner world, the more responsive your words. You're not as easily hooked by others. Their moods don't dictate your speech. Their projections don't throw you off. You stay steady, not because you're detached, but because you're not trying to control anything. You're rooted in presence, not in performance. You also learn the art of not speaking. You realize silence isn't awkward, it's powerful. You stop rushing to fill space. You give others room to find their words. You let quietness say what words cannot. Sometimes the most respectful thing you can offer is your silence, not as withdrawal, but as attention, as reverence for the depth beneath the noise. When you do speak, your words carry energy that comes from stillness, not reaction. People can feel this. It's not about the vocabulary you use, it's about the awareness behind it. You can say something simple and it lands deeply because you meant it. You weren't posturing, you weren't trying to prove, you were just present. This changes how you apologize, how you set boundaries, how you express care. Apologies become sincere, not performative. Boundaries become clear, not confrontational. Expressions of love become gentle, not needy. Everything becomes more honest. not because you're trying harder, but because you're holding less. Letting go of attachment in speech is not about detachment from people, it's about releasing control over how communication unfolds. You say what you need to say, then you release. You listen without planning a rebuttal. You speak without tightening around your image. And when the conversation ends, you don't replay it endlessly in your mind. You let it go. Even difficult conversations become opportunities for growth. You're no longer afraid of disagreement. You don't collapse at the first sign of tension. You trust yourself to speak clearly, and you trust others to respond however they need to. That mutual respect builds a foundation where honesty can thrive. This kind of communication begins to feel effortless, not because you're doing less, but because you're clinging less. Your energy isn't spent protecting your ego, managing perceptions, or chasing approval. It's directed into presence, and from presence, your voice flows naturally, cleanly, without the weight of need. Over time, speech becomes an offering, not a tool. You offer truth, you offer clarity, you offer care, not to get something back, but to express what's real. This is what allows your words to carry power, not volume, not polish, but sincerity rooted in awareness. You begin to feel how every word is a choice. And that choice can either deepen connection or create distance. You're no longer careless with your language. You don't use sarcasm as a shield. You don't hide truth behind politeness. You speak in ways that free, not bind, that open, not trap, that heal, not divide. This is the heart of non-clinging speech, not restraint, but freedom. Not silence for the sake of silence, but words that rise from stillness. It's how communication becomes part of your path, not just as a social skill, but as a spiritual practice, as a mirror for your inner clarity, as a tool for living lightly and honestly in a world that's often loud and reactive. You keep speaking, you keep listening, but now each word becomes a step, each silence a breath, each conversation a chance to offer presence without needing to hold on. You speak, and then you let go. You listen, and then you let go. And in that letting go, something beautiful happens: connection without control, truth without tension, and the quiet knowing that speech, when rooted in awareness, always leads you home. When your words no longer carry the tension of needing to control outcomes, when speech becomes an offering instead of an extension of ego, life begins to feel lighter. Communication loses its edge of urgency. But there's another current, deeper and quieter, still pulling at you. It's subtle, almost invisible. A hum beneath everything you do, the sense that time is running out, that you should be further along, that this moment isn't enough because another one is always waiting. This is time thirst, the quiet craving that keeps you out of presence, not always through planning or thinking about the future directly, but through the belief that now is not complete, that the next moment holds something better, that meaning is somewhere ahead, waiting for you to arrive. And so your mind moves constantly forward, occasionally backward, rarely still. Letting go of this thirst doesn't mean abandoning responsibility or ignoring practical time. It means ending the addiction to future-focused thinking that drains your attention from what's here. It means recognizing that awareness is not trapped inside the clock, that you don't need more time to find peace. You only need less attachment to time's story. In Buddhist thought, the Dhamma is described as akaliko, timeless, not because it ignores the passage of hours or days, but because truth doesn't depend on linear movement. What is real can be known now, not after you improve, not when life feels easier, not once you've earned it, but in this moment, as it is, without delay. The mind resists this. It's been trained to chase, to map progress, to mark milestones. Everything is measured: success, healing, awakening, even rest. The belief runs deep. If you're not moving towards something, you're wasting time. But this creates tension in the body, restlessness in the mind, and dissatisfaction in the heart. Even when things are calm, part of you waits for the next moment to validate your worth. To release this pattern, you don't force yourself to stop thinking about time. You begin by noticing how often your thoughts are tied to it. You pay attention to the subtle ways you project into the future. The quick mental check of how long something will take. The silent pressure that you should be doing something more productive. The background belief that now is only valuable if it leads somewhere. Once you see it, you don't need to fight it. You simply return to what's here. The breath, the sound, the feeling in your hands. You realize that this moment doesn't need to lead to another to be complete. It can just be, and that's enough. Not conceptually, but experientially. You begin to feel the fullness of a moment when it's not being used as a stepping stone. This shift isn't dramatic, it's quiet. A slow dissolving of mental momentum. The mind will still create plans, remember events, hold appointments. That's not a problem. The suffering arises when those mental movements become who you are. When you forget that awareness doesn't move through time, time moves through awareness. You begin to sense the difference between being in time and being aware of time. The former keeps you chasing. The latter lets you observe without being pulled. You can still prepare for tomorrow. You can still recall yesterday, but you stop living in those thoughts. You stop letting them define what's possible now. The feeling of urgency fades, not because life slows down, but because you stop measuring yourself against imagined timelines. You don't need to accomplish more to feel valid. You don't need to reach a certain point to feel complete. The very pressure to become starts to fall away, replaced by the quiet reality of being. This doesn't make you passive, it makes you precise. When you're not rushing, you act with more clarity. You speak when it's needed, not when you're anxious. You rest without guilt. You create without grasping. You work without losing your center. Because time is no longer chasing you, it becomes a tool, not a trap. You also stop fearing time's passage. Aging becomes less threatening, change becomes less disorienting, because you're no longer trying to freeze life in place. You begin to understand that what you really feared wasn't time, it was missing it. And now, being here fully, you're not missing anything. This depth of presence can't be forced. It's allowed. It unfolds as you release your grip, as you stop believing every thought that pulls you forward. You might still plan your week, but you don't live inside those plans. You return again and again to the stillness that's already whole, already free. Even your relationship to memory begins to change. The past is no longer something to fix or relive. It becomes a gentle presence in the background, informing but not defining. You can honor what's happened without losing yourself in it. You can feel what once hurt without becoming it. Because you are no longer shaped by time, you're grounded in awareness. When you're anchored in this now, the mind stops needing certainty. You don't need to predict what comes next. You meet it when it arrives. You respond instead of anticipating. That responsiveness becomes your path. Not because you know where it's going, but because you trust your ability to meet each moment clearly. This is where you begin to feel life in its fullest. Not in the rare highs or the milestones, but in the quiet hum of presence, the taste of food, the tone of a voice, the way light moves across a wall. These moments are not preparation for later joy. They are the joy. The more you live here, the more the obsession with next starts to dissolve. Even in difficulty, presence brings relief. Pain feels sharper when you resist it, when you want it to pass quickly. But when you stop waiting for pain to be over, and just feel it now, without story, something loosens. You don't need to know how long it will last. You don't need to rush its departure. You hold it gently and let it unfold in its own rhythm. You begin to live in alignment with how life actually works, not as a straight line, but as a living current. Some days move fast, others slow. Some feel open, others dense. But none of them are wasted. You stop needing each day to prove something. Being here becomes enough. Doing what's needed becomes enough. This frees you from comparison, because comparison is always rooted in time: who got further, faster, who started before you, who arrived first. But when you're no longer measuring progress as worth, you stop playing that game. You stop needing to compete with someone else's timeline. You let yourself move in rhythm with your own clarity. This rhythm cannot be forced. It must be heard, felt, allowed. And the more you stay in presence, the more it speaks. You know when to act. You know when to rest. You don't need to calculate every step. You simply remain awake to what the moment asks of you. This is not stagnation, it's aliveness. Because presence is never stuck. It's dynamic, responsive, fully engaged. The difference is that now your action isn't driven by fear of missing out, it's guided by truth. There's no longer a race, just real movement, grounded in now. Eventually, you begin to sense something even deeper. That now is not a sliver between past and future. It is not fleeting, it is the whole field. Everything you've ever experienced has only happened in this now. Time appears to move, but awareness remains. Still, whole, unchanging. You rest there, not as an escape, but as the place from which all of life flows. You speak from there, you listen from there, you walk from there. And you begin to understand why the teachings say the Dhamma is timeless, because truth does not wait. Awakening is not later. It is here. It is now. Always now. Letting go of time thirst doesn't mean abandoning your life. It means entering it fully, releasing the illusion that peace is elsewhere. Trusting that this moment, touched with full attention, reveals more than any future ever could. You are not late. You are not behind. You are here. And that is everything. Stay here. Keep releasing. Keep breathing into the space that has no schedule. Let the mind move, but don't follow. Let the future unfold, but don't chase. Let now hold you not as a concept, but as your home. The only place you've ever truly been. The only moment that ever was. And the only one you ever need. When you stop chasing time, life becomes quieter. The urgency fades. Your attention returns. You stop measuring the moment, and instead, you begin to experience it. But as stillness settles, you may notice something more subtle that continues to stir beneath the calm: thought. It keeps moving, with or without your permission. It appears like wind, like whispers, like noise in the background. Some thoughts rise softly, others with force. Some pull at you, some confuse you, and many seem to appear from nowhere. The question is, what do you do with all of them? Most people don't notice how automatically they engage with thought. A thought comes, and instantly it becomes real, believed, chased, defended, and without meaning to, you begin building around it. You construct an identity, a storyline, a mood, and before long you're not observing thought, you're inside it. You're reacting to it, trying to solve it, pushing it away, holding on. That's the dam, and it's heavy. The practice is not to stop thought. That's not possible nor necessary. Thought is part of the mind's nature. The shift is learning how to observe without interruption, to stop building dams and let the stream flow. Thought can pass like water when you stop trying to hold it still. This is where clarity lives, not in control, but in relaxed awareness. Vipassana meditation gives you a way to practice this directly. It trains your attention to see thought as movement, not truth. You don't analyze, you don't suppress, you witness. You recognize thought as an object, no different than a sound or a sensation. It comes, it goes. It isn't you. It doesn't need to be acted on. It only needs space. The process begins by anchoring in the body. Breath, posture, sensation. These are steady. These are here. As you rest your awareness, thoughts will still arise. They may try to pull you into planning, remembering, judging. You simply notice. Label softly thinking, planning, remembering, and return. Not with frustration, with gentleness. Over and over. At first, this feels repetitive. The mind seems wild. But in time, a gap forms, not between the thoughts themselves, but between the thought and your reaction. You begin to watch without attachment. You see that the thought is not a threat. It's just passing energy, a formation, a habit. It doesn't require your involvement. It doesn't define you. This realization brings relief, because so much mental exhaustion comes not from thought itself, but from believing you need to fix it all. Most of the thoughts that arise don't need solving. They only need witnessing. When you stop interfering, they move on. Like clouds, like weather. They belong to no one. They come, they pass. You remain. As you develop this skill, your relationship with thought softens. You stop resisting negative thoughts. You stop clinging to positive ones. You treat them all with the same gentle curiosity. You realize that thought is not the enemy. Clinging is. Aversion is. The attempt to force clarity when the mind is naturally shifting is what causes confusion. In this stillness, your real intelligence begins to rise. Not the kind that solves with pressure, but the kind that perceives directly. You start to feel decisions before you form them. Clarity doesn't come from effort, it comes from space. When thought flows freely, intuition emerges. Not as guesswork, but as insight from a mind that isn't tangled. This insight doesn't come on demand. It arises when the mental clutter thins. That's why stillness is not about thinking less, it's about relating to thought differently. When thought is not held tightly, the deeper mind has room to speak. You sense what's aligned. You recognize truth by feel, not by debate. Your attention sharpens not from narrowing, but from openness. You also begin to notice the patterns of thought more clearly. The repeated stories, the fears that recycle, the internal voices that imitate past voices. You don't need to change them directly. You watch. And by watching, you loosen their hold. A thought that's seen clearly loses its grip. It can't control what you no longer believe. This watching becomes a way of life, not just a meditation practice. You observe how thought shapes your posture, your speech, your reactions. You catch yourself before you say something reactive. You pause before a defensive comment. You don't interrupt. You don't withdraw. You stay with the inner movement and choose how to respond. This is freedom not from thought, but within it. Even difficult thoughts begin to lose their threat. You see anger arise and don't tense. You watch doubt surface and don't panic. You don't turn away. You don't get swept away. You hold steady, like standing in a river without needing to stop the water. You are not fragile here. You are aware. This doesn't make you distant or removed. It makes you intimate with experience. Because now you're meeting life directly, not through the filter of analysis, not through the haze of interpretation, but through the freshness of each moment. Thought still moves, but it doesn't separate you from what's real. There's also a shift in how you speak. You think more clearly before speaking. You pause naturally. You're not editing yourself, you're allowing the space to hear yourself. And what comes out is more honest, more rooted, because it's not rushed. It's not shaped by anxiety. It's arising from awareness, not habit. This deep listening to your own mind changes how you relate to others. You see how much of communication is people talking through their thoughts, not from their presence. You stop taking things personally. You sense when someone is speaking from fear. You don't respond to the words alone, you feel what's underneath. And often, silence is your answer. You become less reactive in conflict, not because you're suppressing thought, but because you're not entangled with it. You hear your own internal commentary and let it pass. You hear the other person's emotion and stay with it. You don't agree or disagree immediately. You rest in awareness until something clear arises. This presence becomes your boundary. It protects without pushing. Over time, you discover that the mind is never the problem. The problem is believing every thought. Clarity isn't found in controlling the river. It's found in allowing it to move while you remain grounded on the bank. You become less afraid of mental movement. You trust your capacity to observe, to let go, to respond only when needed. Even creativity shifts. You stop forcing ideas. You let inspiration arise from the quiet space between thoughts. You don't rush solutions. You wait, you listen, you allow the unknown. This patience becomes a strength, because now your work flows from awareness, not from pressure. This also transforms how you process emotion. Emotions are not separate from thought, they're often fueled by it. You feel anger, and thought fans it. You feel grief, and thought replays it. But when you watch both the emotion and the thought that feeds it, you hold space for healing. You don't need to suppress feeling, you simply stop adding commentary. As this observation deepens, the self-story starts to dissolve. The narrative that says who you are based on thought begins to lose power. You don't need to be the thinker. You are the awareness that sees thought arise, that sees emotion swell, that sees identity shift. And in that seeing, you are free. This isn't abstract, it's direct, practical. You're not escaping life, you're entering it more fully, without defenses, without illusions, without needing every thought to be true. You remain soft, but awake, engaged, but not tangled. That clarity allows you to move through life with more ease, more grace, more wisdom. Vipassana is not just a technique, it's a mirror. It shows you what's real beneath the noise. And once you've seen it, you stop needing certainty. You stop needing the mind to be quiet before you act. You trust awareness to guide you. You stop fighting the river. You float, you navigate. You let the current carry what it needs to. You build nothing. You block nothing. You simply remain. And in this remaining, you find peace. Not the peace of silence, but the peace of freedom. Thought continues to move, life continues to change, but you are no longer grasping. You are no longer building dams in a river that was never meant to be stopped. You're watching, listening, moving when it's time, and resting when it's not. This is how insight becomes action, how presence becomes power.